In the last 10 years, we've put more effort into teaching founders how to pitch than we have how to sell. Early days of Run the Red, our funding came from actually figuring out something to sell that someone would pay for. There were no angels, there were no VCs. And the whole idea of raising funds to, bridge that early stage, there's pros and cons of that. And I think one of the cons is that too many businesses last for way too long, because they get funded through that period when they actually should be focusing on making sales. And if they can't find a product market fit, then they should fail.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Ways to Wealth. Today I'm joined by Deborah. Deborah, why don't you give us the TLDR on who you are and what you get up to?
Thanks for having me, Charlie. So I don't know, where does one start? I grew up on a farm down in Southland, oldest of four, large Irish Catholic family. I have 55 first cousins, fun fact. I often look back on my entrepreneurial journey and I think that actually started on the farm. With my father, he was, I think a lot of farmers are quite entrepreneurial, but he definitely was, and supplemented his sheep and grain farm with breeding horses, ostriches, fitches, is the founder of a company called Biofeed, which is an organic compost tea, one of the earliest organic certified products in New Zealand back in the 1990s. It's still going. Yeah, so then anyway, I went, off to boarding school in Dunedin, and then I was at an all-girls school. Maths, physics was sort of my strength. There was like three of us in our physics class. And initially I wanted to be an astronaut, so I was going to become a pilot. And the Air Force turned up one day and were telling us, about all these great careers that you could do in the Air Force. And so I asked them about being a pilot. And they were like, oh, no, sorry, girls can't be a pilot. So it's not that long ago, right, that we had these sorts of barriers in front of us. So I literally walked out of the room, much to the disappointment of my chemistry teacher. And I was just like, well, what's the point of staying? So I did go and do an engineering degree because that was the other thing that astronauts tended to be. Right. But around that same time, we had, Nuclear Free New Zealand. And anyway, there was no pathway for Kiwis to become an astronaut. So I had to kind of let go of that one. So did an electrical engineering degree, had a scholarship with Telecom back in the day. Worked with them for a few years, and then it was probably about my mid-20s. I was not long back from, 18 months overseas, as we do. Yes. And I was looking at engineers, and then I was looking at this new thing called IT. This is sort of the mid-90s, and I realised that people in IT were making 3 times as much money as us engineers. Right. So I just decided a rebranding exercise was required. So, mid-20s, you're still sort of following the money. And I leveraged my project management skills that I had in telecom as an engineer and moved over to IT. So early days of web development, involved in the very first online banking web system. And then that just sort of progressed from there. And then a few years later, I met who then became my co-founders of Run the Red, which was the first company that we had. And we basically taught New Zealanders how to text. Right. Early days of the digitised telco networks, they'd spent all this money on the digitisation and they needed to monetise their data, and texting was one of the easiest ways to do that. Right. So we created mobile marketing campaigns, those 4-digit codes you would, enter in to win, I don't know, a handbag or something. But we also did games via those old phones. This is pre-smartphones. Okay, so you were doing like Snake-esque games? We did rock, paper, scissors via text. You literally played off against the machine, and then you went through rounds, and then the final group ended up being filmed live for a final showdown of rock, paper, scissors. And this was sort of before the days of reality TV as well, so it was a really big deal to be someone from the back blocks of New Zealand winning the opportunity to be on live TV. Right. And then we did things like we did a push the button campaign for Telecom, where it was like battleships, and then the prize winner got to push a button to sink one of the Navy ships off the coast of Wellington. So that was pretty cool. Like, you got to blow off a ship.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was fun times. So that was sort of the 2000s. And as it evolved, it became more appointments, it became more transactional, it became a bit of text charity type stuff, became about getting your bank bank balances. But towards sort of the early 2010s, 2012, we could see iPhones had come in. We could see it was going to become a commodity kind of product. We'd had a little Segway joint venture over into Brazil that had fallen on its face with the global financial crisis. We then did a push into the US, but we'd really left our run a bit late because it just coincided with the iPhones coming out. So we retrenched back into New Zealand and the South Pacific and just sort of built ourselves up to be the best little textiling company in that region. And then we proactively set ourselves up for sale because we could see that was, where we needed to go. We didn't have the energy for the pivot into something new. We'd all sort of, we'd been in it now for like 15 years. Our own lives had moved on. By that stage, most of us had partners, children. We were just sort of in a different phase. Yeah. And we were lucky enough that when I say lucky, we sold to Pushpay, so that was a good result for us. And that was 2014.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
12 years ago.
So that was a little while ago. So what was interesting then was a lot of the time towards the end of that journey, I'd find myself thinking about like, what's the purpose of this?
Mm-hmm.
I was noticing I was probably, I was in my mid-40s. I was beginning to get a little more, what's the point of why we do these things? Whereas previously it was about the technology. I mean, yes, it was about making money. That wasn't necessarily the main driver, but it was doing new stuff. It was doing cool stuff. It was fun.
Yeah.
But then in this last chunk of time, I've definitely moved to more sort of purpose-driven.
Okay.
Definitely noticed a shift in my thinking.
And was that the come down after the sale, on the way to the sale?
Yeah, but I'd always had a very strong environmental thread, probably even with the farming background.
Yeah.
And I also have a teacher, like a spiritual teacher, you could say, out of the States that I've had for 30 years, and that's called The Way of Nature. And it's very grounded in ecological health and well-being. John would be one of the grandfathers of the environmental movement of the United States. He's in his late 80s now. So I'd always sort of had that going on. And so it was a little bit of a tension, you might say, that existed within me. So the timing of the Pushpay sale coincided with we'd been living in Los Angeles, my husband and I and our son.
Okay.
So I'd been like country manager for Run the Red over there. We'd had a US shareholder. As I'd mentioned earlier, we'd looked at a push into the US, but then realised that the timing had sort of passed us by. So we actually arrived back in New Zealand the same month that the sale to Pushpay went through.
Right.
And my husband works for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and he's a customer manager there, and a role came up for him in Tauranga. So that's where we've been for the last 12 years is Tauranga. So, we didn't wait till retirement to move to the Mount. We were able to move in our 40s. Yeah. It's, that's been that's been a good place to have landed because once again, which sort of is a slightly different topic, right? So much wealth that exists, financial wealth that exists in New Zealand is on the back of appreciating assets. And, we've certainly then been a beneficiary of that. But for me, on a personal level, I sort of found myself in this wanting to give back.
Okay.
Back into the ecosystem, set myself up as a mentor advisor to other people in the startup ecosystem, particularly in digital tech. Did that for sort of a few years, ended up in another startup, which was around anti-money laundering back in about...
Was that CloudCheck?
No, we didn't end up coming to fruition.
Okay.
So similar to, there's several of them now.
First AML.
Yeah, it's similar to First AML, but we didn't manage to manifest. It was actually a classic case of founder fallout. On paper, looked like a really good pairing, but once we got all the design and now we're ready to raise funds, we were very different in our age demographic. Right. And so it just became obvious that we were at different stages in our lives, different value sets, right? So we sort of quit before we got too deep into it,
right.
and had responsibility for other people's money and that kind of thing.
Totally.
The other thing was it wasn't really, I realised it still wasn't really aligned with my value set and who I was. Like I was sort of the technologist into the subject matter expertise that the other person was bringing in, but it was sort of their passion project, you might say.
Right. Yeah.
And I think that's a key thing I've learned too. Well, I think for me, as I've got older, I've had more choice around that, right? Like you don't always have.
Yeah.
Earlier in your career, you don't necessarily have a lot of choice as to what you're doing. You've got other externalities.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So then that led me, back in 2018, when that one came to an end, I reconnected with one of the guys who had been our software architect at Run the Red.
Right.
And him and his wife were now, they had a company called The Formery, which was looking at the textile industry and and looking at the issues of how much textile goes to landfill at the end of life.
Right.
And I guess the embodied carbon that exists within the whole textile supply chain. And looking at solutions around that. So I reconnected with them and did a little bit in that advisory side for the first year or so. And then in 2020, we co-founded together a company that's called Usefully. And so Usefully is looking at how to, reduce the carbon footprint of unwanted textiles at end of life.
Right.
That's sort of been what's occupied me mainly for the last 5 years. But also, funding's been challenging. So the last 3 years, I've also had contract work in the science ecosystem. Right. So I currently have a part-time role with Otago University as a business development manager, helping our scientists with understanding their impact pathways to market and commercialisation, which is also very rewarding.
Yeah, cool. I mean, it seems to me like that is the trend going forward, is more kind of decentralized income streams and equity streams, fractional work, fractional gigs across multiple gigs perhaps, seems to be a bit of an emerging and probably well-established trend now. Really started to kick off in 2020, and now it's kind of commonplace, whereas 7 years ago, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, wasn't really the same dynamic. You had the nomads, right? The remote nomad people that would do stuff, but now it seems like it's even more common.
Yeah.
I guess you've been in the game a long time. What do you feel like's changing now? Do you feel like you have any observations, any realizations through this process? You obviously have gone through the full emotional life cycle of what's the point, or this is really exciting and I'm building things, and then to the why am I building these things, to what's the point, etc. So do you think that is it all the same and we just think it's different because it's a different time, or?
That's a really interesting question, and I've probably got multiple threads. One thing I've reflected on a lot recently, and I've said this to a few people, is I feel like in the last 10 years, we've put more effort into teaching founders how to pitch than we have how to sell.
Yeah.
Back when early days of Run the Red, our initial funding literally came from the Friends, Fools family segment, right? There were no angels, there were no VCs. And our funding came from actually figuring out something to sell that someone would pay for.
Yep.
Early on, because there was no other choice. And the whole idea of raising funds to, bridge that early stage and to grow and scale, I think it's got, there's pros and cons of that. And I think one of the cons is that too many businesses last for way too long because they get funded through that period when they actually should be focusing on making sales. And if they can't find a product market fit, then they should fail. And they should move that resource and attention on something else. So I think that we've got one of our productivity drains is the fact that we've got so much brain power and, just expertise sort of like stalled and things that we sort of buy into this, if I can just raise more money, fine. So that's one thing that I think has changed significantly.
Do you think that's about to change again?
I think it has to. Yeah, I do.
Yeah, / already may have, outside of maybe a small group, right? Like, it seems to me like that first check that we used to get for, getting to some inkling of maybe product market fit, but also a basic product, now is almost irrelevant or not needed or shouldn't be needed. Because you can build so much faster these days. Obviously, it depends on which niche you're in or what you're doing. Because obviously, if you're in hard tech, you're in deep tech or anything like that, or you're in very regulated industries and kind of like product lines, then it makes sense. But now, obviously, the cost of productivity has actually dropped quite a lot. So where does that pre-seed funding is now very interesting, right? Because you go, well, do you need $500,000 or do you actually need, 6 to 12 months of getting product market fit with a technical person and some agents?
And that's true when you're in the digital realm.
Yeah. So, right? And your pivot has been more into, by the sounds of it,
science, deep tech, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at the problems that we're facing, you think of what's just been happening in the last 6 months, with the storms we've been having, with the disruption to shipping, with where fuel's going, we need to become more resilient as a country.
Yep.
And resilience isn't going to come through digital technology, right? So when we looked at Usefully, for example, I initially got involved because of the digital tech component of it. So we were building a piece of software to track and trace the carbon emissions, the embodied carbon, the water utilisation of that textiles. And if you diverted it from landfill and then you deconstructed it into a fibre that went into an industrial application, so we're talking emulsions, we're talking roading, we're talking construction industry, then the whole idea was that we were going to be able to give you a figure for your sustainability report that could show how good you were being. The problem was that if you don't actually have solutions, like physical solutions of how to, basically transfer that waste textile into a product that's useful,
right,
then all we're doing is telling people how bad they are and how good they could be if and when a solution existed.
Yeah, the first tech business I got involved in was a recycling-based business, but they brought me in to help them gamify the process to basically encourage recycling. And obviously, when I look back on that now, having gone, it had been, over a decade, maybe 12, 13 years, obviously the kind of incentive was to then create more waste, recycle more, which is kind of actually a bit of a broken kind of approach, perhaps. So I think, it's interesting when the incentives also get muddied, right? Like gamification is actually kind of the epitome of kind of muddying incentives in a way, right? Because you're basically like, oh, well, you may not want to do this thing, or I may want to encourage you to do it more. So therefore, I'm going to maybe make you over-recycle.
Well, the thing is, once we've got those ecosystems in place and the solutions, something like gamification absolutely has its place to encourage people to do things, right? But if those other parameters don't exist, or those other parts of the ecosystem aren't in place, then it's just kind of, what's the point?
Yes.
So I think that was one of the biggest shifts in my thinking recently is almost doubling down on our need to really think about where we put our money and to open up opportunities for those who do have, financial wealth to reinvest, to help build the infrastructure that we so desperately need in order to bring these solutions to fruition. because we simply don't have enough taxpayer funding to cover all of these things. At the moment, our taxpayer funding is just going into basics. It's going into tidying up after storms. It's going into fixing roads. It's going into trying to improve our health system. It's going into education. I agree with a lot of that. It's going into housing, right? Those are all good things for it to go into. But it's also these, I guess, events from whether it be COVID or whether it be the storms, etc. They've taken a big toll on our savings as a country.
Right. Yeah.
Right? So, there's been all these cuts to the science ecosystem and research ecosystem in this last year or so, or actually probably even in the last decade, you could say. And I think it's really short-sighted. I think we really underestimate the role that our fundamental science has in our health and well-being as a nation. I can see why governments made these cuts because they're just simply going, we just don't have enough money in the bank, right? But that doesn't mean we should not pursue avenues to fund these sorts of things that need to be in that, they need to start off on a philanthropy kind of basis. They need to be genuine impact investing. They need a 20-year horizon. We need ways of having more sustainable, productive businesses that are going to give you that maybe 3x return. We've got to move away from this mindset, this VC mindset of, we're wanting that unicorn company, that billion-dollar company, or we're wanting our 10x, 20x return within 10 years. I mean, New Zealand produces a unicorn maybe or two every decade. But if we could start producing and really getting off the ground companies that are $50 to $100 million companies that are producing product or producing things that we need locally, that means we're not having to import them. It's going to create more jobs. We talk about creating value-add jobs, but we're really not doing it. So to me, that's where we need to be redistributing our wealth and our concept of wealth. I remember being in my 20s and a friend said to me, his definition of wealth was how many years
can he go without working?
Yeah, could he go without working, right?
Yeah.
And that's definitely a measure. But, these days I think about how long could I go if I lost my water supply?
Well, that's self-sovereignty, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which has become more of a focus of people. It's a bit of an awakening for countries, businesses, households, individuals around kind of perhaps actually there was a bit of a cultural dynamic of you'll be looked after perhaps in the West and it will be okay if you just jump on this conveyor belt.
Yeah.
And I think that's even the case with VC. It's just that in VC, everyone just accepts that they'll chew up 99 founders and one will work. And I think that there's actually, just because VC funding, money was so cheap that VC funding got a lot of money, and now it actually has far too much money and it allocates ineffectively because it has too much money and it needs to spend it.
It has more money than the opportunities.
And the VC model is very similar to the wealth model now, which is asset gatherers, not really asset allocators.
Yeah.
There's been a real shift, and that's global, but especially bad here because financial services are just inherently more expensive, which means that then therefore cost of capital is then consequently more expensive than many other places in the world, which kind of is to your point, kind of part of the problem. But obviously now it's going to be interesting because especially if you can get the message out there to be like, hey, the be all and end all is not these metrics that you've been told are really great, like how much money have you raised or how big is your team. And perhaps with the emergence of AI and this kind of more, I guess this kind of desire, I think, that is maybe permeating in the zeitgeist of being more self-sovereign. That, you can do some pretty simple math around like dilution and actually is your outcome better? I have friends that raised no money, and they built, and then they sold at a pretty great and amazing valuation, but they got it all.
Yeah, exactly.
And, I look at, large financial institutions like us where the founders combined have low, 2 digits in terms of, percentage points.
Yeah.
In my head, I go, oh, well, I need to sell at actually like a 15th of the valuation, and I'll actually end up with more than the founders of that massive institution. So I think there's this kind of like untold or uneducated kind of dynamic of you're giving a part of yourself away every time you raise money.
Yeah.
And if you can be industrious and find ways to sell something so you're not giving away equity, perhaps that works at different times, and it depends on what the business is and what the strategy is. But we've been questioned on that because we haven't gone and raised lots of funding, but we've found ways to make money.
Absolutely. It's to my earlier point, right?
And it's been really great for us. And it means that we get to choose our own destiny. But it's kind of like, I get it. The other side has been that there's been this great windfall of capital that that entrepreneurs could get access to, and still can, to if they've got AI in the vibe at the moment, I think. And then we'll see what it looks like 5 years from now, right? Like, I think that's going to be interesting. What do funds look like? Do they continue to get bigger, or is there going to be a shift? That'll be very interesting to see, I think.
Yeah, I think too, there could be a better alignment between, I guess, what VCs are even looking at from a portfolio perspective, and then say what the government signals are in terms of like, what we need from, say, a mission-led perspective as a country. And, if you look at the recent science report that went out to the Prime Minister, they've made it very clear in there what they consider the main pillars. And so, I think one of the things I get frustrated about is the lack of alignment that we have throughout our financial ecosystem.
Yeah.
Right from the concept of an initial idea through to, how it's funded. And once again, I think because I've been in the science-based system for this last, decade, like the science that underpins usefully is technology that came out of Scion, which is now BSI, and we've licensed that off them. Now, that came from the timber industry, and we've repurposed it. But, there's probably been, I don't even know what would have been funded on the science side before we got involved. But even on our side, we've probably had at least $500,000, if not more, of taxpayer money to help get us to where we are so far. We haven't yet taken on any external investment. Not that that's necessarily been for lack of trying.
Yeah.
But our initial plan was to try and build a plant here in New Zealand, but that was going to take sort of $3 to $5 million of capex. There's very few funds that will fund that kind of stage in a company, at that kind of amount of money, because we're outside the check size of the angels, but we're too early stage for the VCs.
Right, interesting.
And we're too, we don't quite fit the sort of the government NZGCP funds or the booster funds.
Right.
We could potentially look at the Pledge Me Snowball kind of more crowdfunding side of it. But I think there needs to be better, what do they call them, vehicles for that stage. And there was a clean tech event in Auckland last week where there were a lot of companies, and the clean tech reports just come out. So there's quite a cohort now of businesses that are in that sort of stage. Many of whom now, like us, we're in the middle of an opportunity to go to Europe. We've got into a campus there. So now we're looking to raise a lesser amount of money to do the market entry into Europe, where we believe the policy settings are right and all of that kind of thing. So there was a little tangent.
Right.
But
good.
It's just to give a sense of, I think we could be a lot more strategic with where that pool of money, like you say, that does exist, where it actually goes and what our expectations are of what a good outcome looks like.
Yeah, for sure. And what would you say success looks like for you then in the next 5 years? Like you've kind of fully embraced this era of kind of being deep in the more science-based arena. You've got your part-time gig that's probably actually also helping inform what you're doing, in your other part of your world as well. What does success look like for you in the next 5 years?
So for us, like we've got a son who's last year at high school, so he's about to go off to university. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I began thinking about exactly that. And I was like looking at my own KiwiSaver as an entrepreneur, it was looking pretty pitiful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. And I really began to think about that. And what dawned upon me was, even though, we live in Mount Maunganui and that would be considered, wealthy suburb, I feel very vulnerable somewhere like this because of the other things that we were just beginning to talk about. Like the cost and the ability to even insure your property, for example, and stuff like that, or the rates. Yeah, that kind of thing is coming through, but also, you're heavily reliant on the supermarkets, you're heavily reliant on having petrol, you're heavily reliant on the city infrastructure for your water supply. And no amount of money can sort of solve for those things when they're just not available.
Right.
We had the opportunity to support a co-housing community development down in the Golden Bay. So that was an example of us like choosing to invest in something else. I mean, yes, it was housing, but rather than say continuing to invest through like enterprise angels and putting 5 or 10K into this company and that company and that company, we actually chose to put a chunk of change into enabling a piece of land to be bought, and then have subsequently bought into one of the houses down in Golden Bay. And so that co-housing community, so we will move there. So we will free up our equity in our home here. That will give us more financial wealth from a day-to-day because we're not just sitting on our asset.
You'll have some liquidity, and you'll have and that can work a little bit harder for you while you spend it. Obviously, in the meantime, when you're drawing from it over time, it's much easier if you're in different asset types.
We're going to see Charlie and say, hey, help us with strategy. but it's also we sit on top of an aquifer, we have our own water system. We've also put some money recently into building out the solar system. So
is that at the new place?
Yeah, at the new place.
Yeah, so you're investing you're getting ready for that, Pete, that to kind of take over in the future. And I guess that's after your son goes off to uni, and it makes sense.
Yeah, he finishes school this year. So
yeah.
So I guess what, my view of what wealth looks like has shifted quite significantly. It's about reducing vulnerabilities and, to sort of, I guess, external events that you don't have any control over. It's about having choice. I think that for me is I already feel very wealthy in that regard. Like I have a lot of choice.
Yeah, you're probably not bound by things that others are, right?
Yeah, so that in itself, I think is so some people I know, they've got a huge amount of money, but they don't seem to have a lot of choice in their life because they're very worried about their assets or their money, or that they're very tied up in managing.
They might be signed up to obligations that require them to work.
Yeah, or it might not require them to work in the sense of a 9-to-5 job, but they're busy. And they don't make it to the birthday parties, or they can't just, a family member has an emergency and needs them, they can't go. They can afford to go, but they have their own perception they can't make the time to go, or they can't prioritize going. So that to me is another, I guess, aspect of wealth is if someone needs me and I want to be there, can I go?
Right. Yeah.
Do I have both the autonomy to make that decision to go, and can I afford to get there? those are sort of the things. And the other thing is health, like just being able to, get out there and enjoy the environment and just, have energy and have vitality, life force. So
Totally.
I think those are the sorts of things now that are important to me, and quality of relationships. My circle feels like it's got smaller and smaller over the years, but the quality of those connections, I think, is a lot better
Right.
than when I had a whole bunch of friends,
Yeah, interesting. And what would you say your biggest challenge is?
I still juggle a lot of balls.
Okay.
So my biggest challenge would be saying no to things. And
The saying no. So would you say it encroaches on a focus thing, or is it just is in your nature if you're entrepreneurial to say yes to stuff?
I'm just, I think a lot of entrepreneurs are, they're like sort of deeply focused and have their fingers in mini pies.
And scattered at the same time.
Yeah, like we sort of jump, we're probably on the spectrum somewhere, some ism, which gives us that, I can get really deep down into something. But like today, I've literally been in 5 completely different planets, you could say,
Right.
like in a usefully fundraising conversation. I chair the local canoe slalom committee, so I was in a thing with Sports Bay Plenty. I was doing my day job. I'm on this course with you, and I'm doing a Rongo Māori course because I really love the whole native health side of things, and I've got my presentation to do for that tonight. So,
Cool.
so that's my day today,
Yeah, that's exciting. So do you see that as a problem, or is that an opportunity at the age and stage you're at, I guess?
It's a problem when I have to just work really hard. Well, I should say work really hard, but I just have to be mindful of my energy levels. And that I, a couple of years ago, about 3 years ago, I had quite a deep depression. And that was because I had allowed myself to not set good boundaries. And so especially doing with Usefully, which was very, I guess, more service-oriented, more save the planet kind of idea, I think I just allowed myself to be run ragged and, I felt exploited, by the broader system. So I've had to learn to get better at being clear about what my boundaries are, what I am prepared to do. The only person who can set them is me.
And so do you think that was like a follow on from the sale? Like, do you think it was kind of connected? Like you kind of went through this like 15-year marathon, you hit this sale, you then tried that, you had this kind of false start as well when you were trying to build the AML program. And then is that kind of when it started to creep in? And then do you think it was like perhaps a dynamic of trying to overcompensate after that long journey and trying to find new purpose?
Yeah, I do. I think it's, I think the first phase you could almost say was all head. And then I went into this phase of wanting to be all heart.
Right.
And it's really got to be a combination of both.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, for me anyway, it literally shattered me.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that was a really important lesson for me.
And how long did it really take you? Because I think we gloss over this, the aspect of it. How long did it really take you to build the habits and the kind of, I guess, the space to actually make progress and get through it?
It's been a graduated journey back to health, and so I'd say the initial phase, probably a year. I did have a lot of good tools in my toolkit, but I wasn't necessarily using them.
Well, it's easier to know that and talk about it and give advice, right? And it's harder to do it for yourself.
Yeah. I had to almost had to reframe in a way for my own self what kind of being of service looked like. Because it is that thing, and I think we're all prone to it to a degree, right? Like, and they'll even say, if you're on the airplane, put your own oxygen mask on first.
Yep.
And I think we all have that part of ourselves where we want to well, maybe not everyone, but where you do want to give to others or you want to be of service. And so it creeps up on you. It's not like something that just all happens overnight, but then something happens and then you realize, oh, I've just literally got nothing left in the tank.
It's like boiling the frog.
Yeah, so I think the initial part was just rebuilding that, emotional health, the mental health. And then though there was sort of the physical aspect of things, that and whether that was also just stage of life, but I'd put on weight, I was eating comfort food, I wasn't as fit, I'd had some physical accidents that had sort of put me out for a while. So that has been a journey too, so I saw a counsellor, then I started getting onto fitness, then I saw a nutritionist, and then I'm on a different gym program now. Got more doubled down on my meditation again, so just building those blocks back in that are those foundational things, putting myself back in the centre, then my husband and my son, and then everything else is after that, but really getting clear on the order of things, because I'd allowed my work, my purpose-driven work, that had become the centre.
Do you think it had become your identity?
I think to a certain extent, yes. Yeah, I think that's probably a fair comment.
And do you think that was kind of like a knock on from you feeling like some of the work you had been initially interested in wasn't as good as you wanted it to be for the world, and then this pivot into purpose-driven activities kind of took hold?
Yeah, we're sort of pendulum, right? And it's interesting. I've had this conversation with some of my peers in similar situations who've had their first company, had their exit, feel like they've made a bit of money out of that, then want to, look at that and go, oh, that was, great in one way, but it wasn't really that meaningful. Jump into wanting to be really meaningful, get burnt a few times, come out of that and then kind of reset and go, oh, okay, right, now I found my groove.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun. I feel like I've learned a lot, so thank you.
Oh, thanks, Charlie. Thanks for the opportunity.